what's going on, everybody? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back today with another client interview for you guys. Today, I'm really excited to have Tyler on with us. Tyler is one of our students who just finished going through his summer internship recruiting process and was able to successfully secure an offer for the summer of 2022. So I wanted to get him on here to talk to you guys about his whole recruiting process and what his experience was like, and hopefully share some insight for you guys that you can then take and maybe implement on your own and help you out as well. So, Tyler, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today, man. And so, before we dive into everything, if you don't mind just introducing yourself real quick and letting people know kind of who you are.
Of course. So my name is Tyler Keller. I'm a junior at Duke University. I'm studying economics and finance with an innovation entrepreneurship certificate. Growing up, I was very entrepreneurial. I had a small tennis racket stringing business that I always talked about in my interviews as sort of the stepping stone to my introduction to business, and why that business essentially made me want to from there, when I got to Duke, I joined a few finance clubs that really got me interested in the field. Started networking and found that it was just something I really wanted to do. I don't want to answer other questions within the introduction, but I would say it was around I would say it was mid freshman year when I truly decided that investment banking was what I was going to go for. And so sort of reached out to Sam and, set that up. So that was definitely a good move.
Got it. Okay. That's awesome, man. So, I mean, you're a junior now, right? I think you decided on banking, you said halfway through freshman year. I believe you joined Wall Street Mastermind in like November of it was in November of sophomore year, right? And so it's like about halfway through sophomore year. So between freshman year when you decided on banking and sophomore year when you actually joined Wall Street Mastermind, like during that initial period, what were you doing on your own to kind of prepare for this investment banking recruiting process, and how was that going for you?
I wasn't doing much on my own. To be completely honest, when I first started the process, I was a bit lost as to where to start. I knew that I had to develop these connections on my own and sort of through the networking process, but also sort of get myself ready in terms of the technicals and learn concepts that I've never heard of before, even at the most basic level. I'd never taken an accounting class. I had taken one finance class. It was my spring semester of my freshman year, and that sort of made me realize that investment banking was for me. So I definitely wasn't doing much. I would say I had a sense that I needed to get going, but I didn't really know which area to get started on and which area to focus on.
Yeah.
And I think it was good for me to sort of step back and sort of realize that I knew nothing about finance technically. And I also knew nothing about networking and sort of how to network and who to reach out to. So something I was doing was I was starting to go on LinkedIn and look up people in the industry and people that I could email. And I found that I wasn't gaining much traction, either because I was still early or because people didn't want to talk to somebody that they didn't know.
Right.
So I started to, reach out to older people that I graduated, which started to give me a little bit better of a sense of what I needed to do. But I was still very lost going into my sophomore year as to how I would even begin the recruiting process.
Yeah. And I guess like an interesting, so that's sounds pretty normal for when people first start recruiting for banking, because it's just hard to know exactly how to go about this entire process when it can be kind of opaque, and you never had to do anything like it before, right? I think fortunately for you, and we were kind of joking about this right before the call, but obviously your older brother also is going to investment banking, right? He is, I guess, 2 years older than you, right?
Correct.
And he actually was the one that joined Wall Street Mastermind first before you, right? And that's kind of how you found out about us. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, got it. So like,
So
did he give you any like recruiting advice when you were first starting out in terms of like what to do and like couldn't you just have him tell you like, hey, this is how I did it and then here's what you should do, or like does it not really work like that?
it works like that to some extent. I think him being a competitive older brother, he sort of wanted me to make the same mistakes he did. He wanted me to struggle the same way he did. And I think I couldn't have been successful in the process if I didn't struggle and learn and like grow. And because I had countless interviews over and over again and kept getting rejections and, takes getting a rejection to realize that something needs to change. Um, he definitely, mentioned that the guides were helpful. I think, you know, we also just sort of talked about the fact that it's so like nice to have a coach. Like when my brother and I both talked about the fact that when we joined Wall Street Mastermind, we weren't only joining a program that would get us up to speed in terms of, technicals and behaviorals, but we were joining sort of a program where we would have someone with us step by step. If we had a question, if we had an interview coming up that we needed to maybe go over or even just talk about. I think that emotional aspect of having someone who's been through it before, sort of looking after you while you're going through it, it just emotionally makes it like okay, it makes the grueling recruiting process a little bit easier.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, like your brother's experience in Wall Street Matchman, your experience was slightly different because he joined later after his summer internship, and he came to us really for help with full time recruiting. Whereas you're obviously starting earlier, and we were helping you with summer internship recruiting, which is actually better. We prefer to help you with summer internship recruiting because there's more that we can actually do, right? Um, but what, and I think like did your brother just like what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind though? Is it that like because why not just like keep doing what you were doing on your own? Was it that you saw that your brother had a good experience in it and so you said, hey, why not? Or did he recommend that you actually go through this? Or how did that kind of come to fruition?
He definitely recommended that I go through it. I think both of us sort of acknowledged the fact that it would be a smart move to start early. He didn't go through this program for whatever reason. He is in a different. He was at Michigan Ross, so that was an undergraduate business program, whereas I'm at Duke, so there's no undergraduate business program or even business major. So just because of where we were at, I think that definitely led us down different paths and allowed him to be extremely successful in his internship search very early on. And I pretty much didn't have that experience. I felt like I was surrounded by a lot of people that wanted to do investment banking here at Duke, and a lot of people who were, it seemed like, a lot farther along in the process than me. And so it wasn't only, jumping into this world where I knew I was far behind technically and in terms of my answers, but just in terms of like how, like, looking around, it just very much overwhelmed me. And so given that, my brother had been through the process and when we talked about how it would be a smart move to start early, he, recommended I reach out and sort of set up that initial phone call to see if I would be a good fit for the program. And after that, it sort of just took off. And, I definitely had to go through the program a few times because part of me was a little bit closed-minded in the sense that I thought I knew what people and banks and interviewees were looking for, but it took time for me to realize that this program is structured in a way that you're able to find like keys on your own, but also sticking to a framework that works.
Got it. I think we lost you a little bit there at the end, but
Right.
You were saying it took time for you to realize that this program is structured in a way such that,
Such that you can develop your own answers as a student and find exactly what it is that makes you unique while also sticking to a framework that just works in general. And so I think having that larger framework that I could stick to allowed me to fine tune parts about me that were more unique than others, but also to do it in the correct way, in a way that made sense. If that makes sense.
got it. Yeah. You're just saying it's like, obviously everyone's going to have different stories to tell and they're different. You guys are different individuals. And it's not that we teach you to all say the exact same things because that wouldn't work, but there is a framework to follow in terms of how you structure your answers so that your answers are organized and concise and are hitting on all the different elements that the bankers want to hear. And so if you plug your unique content into this uh, universal framework, then you kind of have the best of both worlds. Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah. So we're having like a little bit of reception issues. I apologize. And so I
No,
might
that's my problem.
Oh no, no worries. So I might repeat some of the things that you say, so that people can hear it. But so it sounds like maybe in the beginning, like when you first came into the program, maybe you were still kind of trying to do things your own way and maybe not exactly following what's being taught in the program. Is that kind of what you're implying?
You know, I think I came into the program and um, the smallest part of me was a little bit skeptical in the sense that I just one, it was a ton of work. Um, and I wasn't sure if all of that work was required. And like, of course, like going into something that takes a ton of work, you know, it's instinctual to look for shortcuts and to look for the easy way out. And
Mm,
so um, it definitely took a little bit of time for me to realize that sticking to the framework and actually like doing every single module in the program um, in like a linear way is,
yeah,
you know, what allows students to be successful and not doing parts of it.
right. You know, that's so funny that you say that, because like I think a lot of people think that doing Wall Street Mastermind means that you're taking some sort of shortcut or it's you're cheating or I don't know, the job is just being handed to you on a silver platter or something, when nothing could be further from the truth, right? Like you come into Wall Street Mastermind and you're like, oh, I still have to do the work. And like you said, it's like if you don't do the work, it's not like we can just promise you, the results that you want, and like we can't just make things happen out of thin air, right? And I think that's where people kind of get it twisted. Like, can we make the investment banking recruiting process easy? No, like it's never easy, no matter what. What we are trying to do is simply make it. We're trying to make it simple. We're trying to simplify things by removing the trial and error, removing you having to go and figure everything out your own. We put everything in one place, in like you said, linearly in an order that makes sense. It's like, hey, do this first, then do this, then do this, then do this, and that's how you're going to get the most leverage out of everything you do. And that way you can be as efficient as possible, but that's not the equivalent of saying, hey, you don't need to do any work, or hey, you need to do very little work, right? I think that we do save you time. Like for example, on like learning the technicals, it's always easier to have someone teach you the concepts than to try to like learn everything on your own from scratch, right? Like
Right.
that's just like the same thing when you learn anything else. It's easier to learn from an expert. So there are things that do save you time, but like I think the best analogy I can give is it's like sports where you're the athlete and we're the coach, and you can have the best coach possible, but if the athlete is not uh, not hardworking, if the athlete doesn't show up to the gym, if the athlete is not at practice, and or if you are at practice but during game time you don't execute on the game plan that we've been practicing or that we've laid out, then you're probably not going to win the game, right? Um,
That's exactly it.
and so, and I always say this too, which is when we do win the game, the bigger part, like even though both the athlete and the coach had a role to play in it, more of the credit, most of the credit should go to the athlete, right? Like no one ever says like, oh, like the coach won that game. No, it's the athlete that has to go out and win the game. The coach's job is to coach, is to help out on the side and
Mhm.
behind the scenes and set the athlete up for success, but the athlete has to do most of the heavy lifting, right?
Definitely.
So I think that's a great point that you bring up. But I mean, I want to touch on it because it's like I don't want people to get the wrong idea of like, oh, I just come to Wall Street Mastermind, I can pay for this program, and then it's going to be a walk in the park, and this job's just gonna. I like sometimes people feel I feel like they're entitled to this job because they
Yeah.
feel like, oh, I bought this program. No, that's not how it works. That's not how life works. You got to do the work, right? Speaking of
Definitely.
which, when we talk about some of the work that you ended up doing in Wall Street Mastermind, like once you came around and you're like, okay, maybe I should actually go through some of this stuff. What did you find to be the most helpful for you? And like, what are some of the things that you could not have done on your own? Because that's what people always want to know is like, well, can't I just do everything on my own? Like, what's the difference? Right. What would you have to say about that?
Definitely. Yeah. Um, I would say there's a lot of moving parts, and so you can do it on your own, but it won't be as organized as if you were to go through the program. Um, Behaviorally, I would say I didn't really understand that there were a bunch of questions that, I think in the behavioral module, you sort of learn that you can, well, you learn how to write stories, sure, but you sort of learn that there are stories that you can manipulate based on whatever you're being asked. And so, you know, I think for me, going through the program showed me how to construct like those core stories that I could manipulate in any situation. I think that that was very important because those stories sort of have to have meat to them, um, but they have to be constructed in a way that like they're interesting, but also not like not believable if you were to use it like in a way that it wasn't used initially. And so I think learning how to create these stories that show that you grew, and have certain elements in them, but also sort of learning how to write it in a way that you can change it based on any question you get.
Yeah.
um, there was also on the behavioral side a bunch of videos that I stumbled upon late in my recruiting process that I would watch like the night before my interviews, like how to pitch a stock. I think is probably the best video that I've watched. It in 4 minutes told me exactly what I needed to do, and that was an example of truly a question that I could not have done on my own that well. That it was super simplified and sort of like the point where you assess the other side and sort of play devil's advocate and talk about the risks. I would have never thought of that, and that's something that by watching the videos sort of just allowed me to see that that was something important.
Yeah.
um, Technically, I definitely had to, like self-study through. I would say the modules were very helpful for someone who's never seen material before. Obviously, I, complemented the stuff in the videos um, with guides and stuff like that. But you know, the not even the accounting, but like the valuation modules, the DCF, the M&A, the LBO, those were concepts that I actually had never heard of before the program. And um, I found that the program was very unique because rather than memorizing the material, which I thought I could do prior to the recruiting process, I really started to learn the material. And it was like taking a class and stuff, it started to make sense. And the farther that I got in the videos, I realized they kept building on each other. And so it wasn't something that I could memorize. And the technical videos are just unique in the sense that they allow you to actually understand these concepts that you thought were super complicated and could never understand. But really they're just put in very simple terms. And, the more you practice, the better you get at it. It's like anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, look, on the technical side, it's almost like um, people are like, well, what's the secret? Right. And there is no secret. The secret is just like, can you find a good teacher who's actually good at teaching the stuff? Right. Like, we've all had these experiences throughout middle school and high school and college where you can take the exact same subject in school, but if you have like a good teacher versus a bad teacher, it makes a huge difference. Like having a good teacher, everything becomes so much easier and they explain things in a way that's easy to understand, and you feel like you're a genius. And then like if you have a bad teacher, you're just like, I don't understand what the heck is going on, and like something wrong with me or something, right? um and honestly, I think the way we try to teach it inside of Wall Street Mastermind is exactly what you said. It's just like, how do we simplify everything so that it's easy to understand? Like, really, we try to ask ourselves, like, how would you teach this concept to your brother who's in sixth grade who has no idea like what finance is, right? And I mean, if you can do that, if you can dumb it down to that level, like, then anyone should be able to understand this stuff, right? And also, even for our students who then learn this stuff, we tell them like, hey, the moment you know that you truly understand this stuff is when you can teach it to someone else, right?
Yeah.
And so one thing I really like, that I really enjoy seeing is like, like for example, in our Slack channels, when people start asking technical questions, and then before we, the coaches, can even go in and answer the questions, a lot of times these other students are going in and answering the questions for each other. And that's when I look at that, I'm like, oh yeah, that answer's on point. This guy knows like exactly how this works, right? And that's always a beautiful thing for us to see as coaches. um, so it sounds like you benefited a lot on the interviewing side of things, both behaviorally and technically. What about on like getting the interviews? Like, what about like with your networking? Like you mentioned that prior to Wall Street Management, you weren't really having a lot of traction with networking, right? Did that change at all for you afterwards? Like, and if so, like in what way?
Yeah, I think from the beginning I was sort of closed-minded in my ways of networking. I always felt like um, my way was the best way. Um, I would say the networking modules certainly helped me in the sense that I sort of knew what to do, and where to look. Um, and again, like before, when I was close minded, I was reaching out and cold emailing people, going on LinkedIn and sort of guessing their emails and spending hours and hours a day doing that. And, obviously, that is what it takes to get an interview. Sometimes you got to spend, like, I spent probably more time this summer sending emails than actually doing my internship, which is crazy to think about. But when 1 out of 100 people answer, or hopefully more, but sometimes, it's that low, it sort of takes you time to get responses. So, you know, um, I definitely at first was cold emailing and emailing people that were at different schools and, not actually using LinkedIn the correct way. And the networking module definitely showed me how to go about the process in a more organized way. In general, I think it was important for me to recognize that people like to talk to people that went to their school, or someone, if someone has a referral, that can always help. But it's tough to just go into the process, and I felt entitled and that I was questioning why I was doing it. But everyone's so if you don't go about it in an organized way, you're going to spend way too much time sending emails and figuring out who to talk to and how to get interviews and less on your story and the technical side of it. And so there's definitely a balance. And I think this program sort of shows you that balance and also gives you an organized way of how to get started.
Yeah, I mean, with networking, it's like just the sheer number of people you have to reach out to is so high that you have to stay organized, but also not just stay organized. Um, you have to figure out how you can get the most out of every single interaction, right? So, like, if you can convert better with both getting people to respond to you in the first place when you email them, as well as getting people to actually want to help you after you have the conversation with them, then you can either put in the same amount of effort to networking and get more referrals out of it, or you can maybe spend less time on networking and still get the same number of referrals, right? I feel like people are always so focused on like, oh, it's a numbers game. Let me just like network with more people and more people and more people and more people. And it's like, sure, you can do that, but it's so time consuming and there's so many other things you need to do. Like you were doing an internship and you got school and you got, extracurriculars and you have a personal life and there's all these things. Instead of working hard, it's better to work smart and make sure you're actually converting. So it's not just empty calories that you're burning, right?
Definitely. When
Um,
you right when you get that call and you finally have someone responding and saying they're willing to talk to you, like it's important to then obviously get the interview, but it's a balance between being rude and also asking them for their help. And then once you have the interview, you got to nail it. So it's
yeah.
definitely a tough process, but I think the videos sort of show you how to go about it in a way that you don't waste as much time as you normally would.
Yeah. So like in the end, like after going through all this and prepping for the interviews and doing all these networking calls and getting internships and building up your resume, like obviously this was very long process, right? I mean, even just in Wall Street Mastermind, you've been in it for geez, like 9 or 10 months, right?
Yeah.
So what was the outcome in the end for all of this hard work that you put in? Like what was the successful result that you got, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I got an offer for the 2022 investment banking summer analyst position at UBS. So that was a huge success for me. You know, I think it was just a place that I really wanted to work at, and had some great, networking conversations. I think it's important. A lot of people, when they go into the recruiting process, they only think about places that they can get accepted into, but they don't actually think about the place that they actually want to work at. And so it was actually quite interesting to network with people at UBS because I think, something I'd been closed minded to for a long time is like, am I picking a place I want to work or am I just finding a place that will accept me? And obviously it's both, but it's very important and often neglected to enjoy sort of the people that you're going to work with. And, I think it's just often overlooked by students who are recruiting.
Yeah, I think it's often overlooked, not even on purpose, but just because people feel like, beggars can be choosers, right? They're like, hey, if I'm just happy to be here. If I could barely even get an offer, I'll take whatever I can get. Versus if you are prepared enough and if you're confident enough and you know that getting an offer is not going to be the problem, that's just the bare minimum, then you can actually be a little bit more choosy. I don't want to say you can be super choosy and whatever, because no matter what, getting into investment banking is hard to do, right? Getting into a top tier bank like UBS, especially, is no walk in the park. But yeah, like ideally, you would want to have um, some choices, or like you want to end up at a place that you're really going to be comfortable and happy at, because you're going to be there for at least 2 years and you're going to be working for a lot of hours during those 2 years. And it makes a big difference when you enjoy the people that you work with. I know from experience, like it makes a huge difference when there's that camaraderie on the team and the culture is good,
Right.
and this makes a lot. It just makes the hours a lot more tolerable, I guess. Right.
Sure.
So that's a
Definitely.
great point. That's a great point. So I guess like my last question for you, um, looking back on this recruiting process now that you're on the other side of it, was there like a piece of advice that maybe someone gave you along the way that you found to be just extremely helpful for you? Maybe it saved you a lot of time, or maybe it made something a lot easier for you, whatever it may be. Like, is there something like that that you would want to pass on to the other students who are now still going through the process or about to go through the process that you just went through?
Definitely learned that have, you know, treated like it was definitely been a good thing I learned them. And I wish I learned it earlier on. So the first thing is the importance of follow-up answers. So if I just, basically if you're going to say something in an interview or in a networking call, and you have to know how to talk about it one level deeper or even a few levels deeper than just the bare minimum. I think I walked myself into a few too many um, rabbit holes where I was sort of making up stuff, and you never want to do that. I think, a lot of kids don't realize that they can actually just talk about whatever they're knowledgeable at, and can speak a lot to. And so it's pointless to sort of talk out of your, for lack of a better word, ass when, if you're not prepared. And so, the first piece of advice is definitely don't talk about things that you can't back up. And then on the flip side of that, like have some things that you are knowledgeable in that you will bring up no matter what, because maybe that's impressive that you can talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, the second thing that I learned that was pretty huge for me was just the importance of having a story that makes sense. I think when you go into these interviews, you're not only trying to be likable, but you're also kind of showing them that you can do the job, and that you're right for the job and you deserve it. And so if you're someone who's sort of just realized halfway into the sophomore year that investment banking was a thing, and really wanted to secure a summer internship, and that's the reason why you're doing it, that's going to be pretty obvious. And so I think for me, it was very important to figure out my story and how to tell it in a way that made my path seem linear and make sense. So that it wasn't like a question of why I showed up to the interview. It was pretty obvious to the interviewer that I wanted to be there.
Yeah. Those are really great. That's really great advice. I mean, obviously, cannot overstate the importance of having a good story. That's like pretty much always the first question they're going to ask you in an interview. So if you don't nail that, you're already off to a bad start, and it's kind of hard to overcome that, right? And then to your point about being prepared for follow-up questions and having answers prepared for those, and being able to go not maybe just one level deeper, but two, three, four levels deeper. Is like a lot of times bankers will test you to see like if you really know what you're talking about. And if you're only ready to kind of like give the initial answer with no substance behind it, you're going to get exposed pretty quickly, right? So I think those are both really, really that's great advice. That's really useful for people. So thanks for sharing that. So guys, I guess for those of you who are still listening, if you are in a similar situation where maybe you decided you wanted to do investment banking and you try to do a bunch of stuff on your own, whether it's networking or interview prep, and for whatever reason things aren't really clicking for you, or there's just something that's preventing you from getting to the level that you want to be at, and there's something that you're stuck on and you're not quite sure how to solve it, then I want to encourage you guys to reach out and talk to our team and see if we can maybe help you overcome those obstacles, right? But actually, like before you even reach out and talk to our team, I'll do one better than that, which is you can actually first speak to an alumni of Wall Street Mastermind who has already gone through our program and has recruited successfully into one of these top banks. And you can just have a free coffee chat with them, pick their brain, get their advice on recruiting. You can ask them about Wall Street Mastermind if you want, or you don't have to, whatever it is that you want to do with that time. And based on that conversation, if after that you still want to talk to us and you think that we might be able to help you, we'd be happy to talk to you, right? Or if you don't think it's the right fit, then no worries. At a minimum, you got a free networking call out of the experience, and hopefully, like that gives you some advice, right? So, uh, with that said, like if you want to do that, you can book this free virtual coffee chat at www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The streets abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to hopefully helping you out. All right. So, with that said, Tyler, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us today. And again, huge congrats to you on securing this offer with UBS. And obviously, that's quite the accomplishment. And looking forward to seeing all the success that you have ahead of you, both this upcoming summer as well as for full time and beyond. And so, if there's anything else that we can help you with going forward, you're always part of the family. And so just, don't be a stranger, let us know how we can help you.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for all your help again. It was instrumental, and I definitely needed it. So
Yeah,
really
absolutely, man.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. That'll be it for today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. All right.